Okay, so back into it. As I mentioned, so I study anti-predator behavior in birds. That's essentially what my dissertation is on. So Steller jays is one of those birds that I look at. And so I focus mostly on the alarm calls that they give in response. So alarm calls are acoustic sounds, obviously, acoustic sounds, given in response to danger. So in the case of the Steller jays, they have two main ones, they're wah and they're weck, and I'll play these for you in a second. So a couple of the main predators of Steller jays are goshawks, Cooper's hawks, and sharp-shinned hawks, so the accipiters. So this was actually taken at, I don't know if you know Victor Glick's house. He has a goshawk coming into his feeders. Steller jays are not pleased. Makes it really hard to do experiments when your Steller jays are super freaked out. But this is a picture that he took of his goshawk. So your very own Methow Valley goshawk. Okay, so in response to predation, Steller jays and a lot of other birds give what we call mobbing calls. So have any of you guys ever seen a mobbing event where a bunch of smaller birds will attack a bigger bird? It's pretty impressive, right? And so essentially it's the same as you walking up to a grizzly bear and smacking it across the face. So they're, instead of fleeing from their predator, they're actually going towards their predator and calling and actually physically assaulting it, trying to get it from the area. It's pretty impressive. And so here's an example of it in Steller jays. So I played them a sharp-shinned hawk call. So they didn't even see a sharp-shinned hawk. It's not even real. All I had to do was play them a call, and this is what happens. Yep. Mm-hmm. So the sharp-shinned hawk call is played from that speaker. That brown box is a speaker. Yep, so just play a sharp-shinned hawk call, and that's the response you get. And it continues on even after the sound stops. They do not like sharp-shinned hawks. So essentially what I'm interested in is what calls they're giving and how they're altering their calls in response to different predator cues. So if they see a predator versus hearing a predator, what kind of predator it is. Is it a goshawk? Is it a sharp-shinned hawk? Is it a pygmy owl? Is it a control? Does it fly really fast, or does it kind of soar and then swoop down like a red-tailed hawk kind of does? And so I do all of my work at bird feeders. In the winter time, mostly because it's really awesome to sit outside when it's like 10 degrees. So I do this in the Missoula Valley and here in the Methow Valley. So here are my sample sites. So I have a whole bunch over in the Missoula County, as well as spread up and down the Methow Valley. So if you or your friends have Steller jays coming to your feeder, let me know. And if you don't mind if I sit in your backyard like a weirdo, I would love to work at your house. So my research questions kind of come into two categories. So how Steller jays respond when the predator cue modality is acoustic versus visual. So do they hear the predator? Do they see the predator? Does that cause them to behave differently? And then how do Steller jays respond to predators with different hunting strategies? So not all predators are created equal, kind of idea. So as I mentioned, they have two main alarm calls, and then they also have that predator mimicry. So these are spectrograms, so this is what we're going to make a little later. Spectrograms, they're visual representations of sound. So this is time down here on the x-axis and frequency on the y, and then how dark it is how much power there is at that given frequency and time point. So we have their wah call. Probably everyone has heard that. And then we have their weck call, another pretty common one. Okay, and then finally we have predator mimicry. So on the left is a red-tailed hawk call, and on the right is a predator mimic. And so when I play it, you'll hear the red-tailed hawk first, and then you'll hear the mimic of it. It's not bad, right? Yeah, pretty good, pretty impressive. Okay. Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. So these are the main calls that I focus on, these 2 alarm calls in this predator mimicry. What calls are they giving when when they see the predator versus hearing the predator? What mimicries do they give in response to a red-tailed hawk versus a goshawk? That kind of idea. So the predators that I chose, so starting with hunting strategy, how do Steller jays respond to predators with different hunting strategies? I chose 4 different predators and a control. So I have the northern pygmy, which essentially is described as a pine cone hunter, where essentially he just sits there and kind of falls out of the tree like a pine cone onto another bird. It seems to work for him. Then we have the sharp-shinned hawk, which is a really amazing flyer. It's an occipiter, able to track down its prey. It's a smaller bird. And so these brackets right here indicate Steller jay size roughly in relation to the predators. So it's being much bigger than a northern pygmy owl and about the same size as the sharp-shinned hawk. We then have the red-tailed hawk, which is kind of a soaring and then swooping kind of bird. And then finally the northern goshawk, which is another occipiter, chase down its prey, really impressive flyer. And so there's another piece to this, and that is size is really important in the bird world. And it's really just because of maneuverability and turning radii in flight. Bigger birds can't flit like little birds can, right? So you see those little birds having these really quick little turns. It's because their wing radii, their wing spacing is much smaller than a bigger bird. So size should matter. And so here's the prediction that we had if it's related to size, where northern pygmy owl is going to be the lowest threat because it's the smallest and it's too small to actually take a Steller jay. And then northern goshawk is going to be a high threat because it's actually able to keep up with the Steller jay. If that makes sense. So as I mentioned, so for of my predators, so for control I used a Townsend solitaire song. So I played that to them or showed them a Townsend solitaire. And then the northern pygmy owl, low threat, sharp-shinned hawk, moderate threat, red-tailed hawk, a little more threatening, and then northern goshawk being the most threatening. So then I was also interested in what happens when you change from acoustic versus visual cue. And so for acoustic, all I did was play back the predator sounds to them. So I would hide a speaker in the snow, play it towards the feeder, and record what they did. So I did that for 2 minutes. So I played a sound for 2 minutes, and then I continued to record their vocalizations for 5 minutes afterwards, which I called the post-exposure. And then also we have what we call robo-raptors. So we have robotic raptors. They're taxidermy birds that have little, essentially robotics put inside of them so that their head and their tail move. So here's a video of the northern goshawk. And then we also have this tree trunk, which we've hooked up to a garage door opener. So from afar, you can press this button and it will, down it goes. And you can see the tail and the head moving. It terrifies my dog, it terrifies the Steller jays, it totally works. It freaks a lot of humans out as well. And so what we would do is we would put this out near the feeder and expose it for 4 minutes. And we chose a longer time just because sometimes it takes them a while to notice the predators, which just seems counterintuitive. And then we would continue recording for 5 minutes after when we put the tree trunk back up with the garage door opener. So, for the acoustic stuff, I did 3 field seasons, 2 of them being here, working at 21 feeders for a total of 224 experiments that I did over the last 3 years. The visual was actually done by a high school student in Missoula, a real go-getter, and he did 1 field season at 10 different feeders for a total of 40 playback exposure experiments. So, one of the big variables that I measured is a behavioral variable called latency to resume foraging. And so essentially, this means if they stop feeding, how long does it take them to come back to feeding? And the thought was the longer they stay away, the more threatening the predator is. So this is a way for them to tell me what they find threatening instead of me trying to assign it by hunting strategy or size or cue or something like that. So I'm going to show you a video of what this looks like. There's going to be Steller jays feeding on peanuts on the ground, and then I'm going to play sharp-shinned hawk, and you'll see them fly away, and then you'll see that mobbing response again. And then red-winged blackbirds. inspect the speaker and start that mobbing response again. Okay, so in this example, this is a longer latency to resume foraging because they're very busy with that mobbing event that they're not feeding, right? That's a long latency to resume foraging. Okay, so using latency to resume foraging as a proxy for threat level, what did I find? What predators do they deem most threatening? Well, if you remember, I predicted that there's going to be a size relationship in there, and you can see that for the most part, that size relationship exists, except for when you put sharp-shinned hawk in there. So when you put sharp-shinned hawk in there, they find sharp-shinned hawks just as threatening as northern goshawks. Yes?
That's strange because they're close to the same size, the sharpies and the jays.
Yes, exactly. So what this is telling us is that size is not everything, and hunting strategy seems to be important. So if we remember the hunting strategy of these different species, we have sharp-shinned hawk and northern goshawk being really agile predators, able to chase down their prey. And they're also bird specialists versus a northern pygmy owl, which is really small and just kind of plops out of the tree, and then a red-tailed hawk, which is more of a generalist and soars and then will come down. So it seems that hunting strategy, this is suggesting that hunting strategy is important. Okay, so for my analysis, I again was focusing on 3 main calls, the wah, the weck, and then their predator mimic. So for the most part, they're able, they mimic red-tailed hawks. That's the most common mimic. They are able to mimic a lot of other things. Northern goshawks is one of them. Dog, cat, osprey. I've heard eagle. Have any of you guys ever heard them mimic eagles? No. So they mimic eagles around here in the valley as well. But the most common is the red-tailed hawk, so that's the one I focused on. So what I did is I looked at the total number of calls that they gave of each kind, the wahs, the wecks, and then the predator mimics. And then I broke down the calls, and in the green I was interested in what I call their elements, so the elements that make up the calls. So in the example of the wah call, there's 3 elements in that call. In the example of the weck call, there's 13 elements in that call, indicated by the green. Okay, so again, we have our proxy for threat level, so we know sharp-shinned hawks and northern goshawks are threatening. So how are they encoding this information in their learn calls? What are they changing in their calls to depict this to other jays? So I found that it doesn't matter if they see or if they hear a sharp-shinned hawk, they're going to give more wah calls regardless. So it doesn't matter if with the cue of detection. Sharp-shinned hawks are scary no matter what. However, to northern goshawks, if they hear a northern goshawk, they don't give more wah calls, but if they see a northern goshawk, then they ramp up those wah calls. So they get into that mobbing event that we saw like that. So there's a big difference between seeing and hearing a goshawk, but there's no difference between seeing and hearing a sharp-shinned hawk, according to their calls. And then this carries on a little bit after the sound ends. So the playback ends, and then they still are giving more calls afterwards. Okay, so then for the total, for the weck elements, so how many elements make up a weck call? So this is where the acoustic goshawk comes into play. So they don't give more wah calls, they give more weck elements per call. So when they hear a northern goshawk, they're going to ramp up those elements in their weck calls, not the wah call. But this is only lasts during the playback period. And then we have the number of elements per wah call. And so this is where we see a difference between hearing and seeing these predators. So if they see a sharp-shinned hawk or a goshawk, they ramp up the number of elements per wah call, but only if they see it, not if they hear it. And then again, this is not continued on in the post-playback. Okay, and then we can't forget about the red-tailed hawk. So the red-tailed hawk is deemed slightly threatening, right? So it does have a longer latency to resume foraging than the control or the pygmy owl. So it is threatening. So what do they do to red-tailed hawks? Well, they give significantly more red-tailed hawk mimic calls to red-tailed hawk playback calls. So we didn't have a robotic red-tailed hawk. We only were able to use the playback. But when I play them red-tailed hawk, they give me red-tailed hawk mimics back, significantly more than to any other predator. So this suggests that they may be using it as an alarm call. So mimicry can be used in a lot of different ways. It's often used in a sexual selection context where a species is trying to increase their repertoire size by mimicking other things. So the lyrebird in Australia is a really good example of this, mimicking all sorts of weird things to increase the repertoire size. That doesn't seem to be the case here. It seems to be more an alarm call because they're giving it in response to a predator. So that's what I think is going on with the mimicry. Any questions about any of that? Yes?
I don't know if this is a big question or a little question, but why does it matter, or why do we care whether they're making a wah or a weck?
Excellent question. Why do we care? Maybe not everyone does care. I care. So it's this idea of encoding. So really coming down to bird language. So what are they saying?
Yeah, what does it mean?
Yeah, and so the point is that it's complicated. It's not as simple as one call for one predator, or they, are just higher pitched the more scared they are. It's really complicated. They're making subtle distinctions between different predators based on size, hunting strategy, and whether they see and or hear it, and they're encoding this in their alarm calls. So other birds are able to listen in on this and actually figure out what predator is around based on these alarm calls.
Yeah, okay, thanks.
Yes?
Do they use any of these calls to scare other birds from feeders?
Excellent question. So there is some claims out there that they use mimicry to scare other birds from the feeder. I have never witnessed this in my 3 years of doing field work on Steller jays. Usually when Steller jays mimic a red-tailed hawk, the other birds don't care. Chickadees don't care about red-tailed hawks. They don't, right? And so it doesn't seem to bother them. There is examples of drongos in South America, a sentinel species. This guy Charlie Munn in the 80s found that they'll give a fake mimetic call to scare other birds away from a really spectacular piece of food, but I don't think that's what's going on here. I don't have evidence for that though. Yes?
Do the mimicry calls come early in the alarm sequence? In other words, you're going to get the mimic call immediately after they hear it. It's kind of like, hey, there's one of these, hey, there's one of these.
That's what I think is going on. It's hard to tell because there's only red-tailed hawks. Oh, sorry. So he was wondering when they give the mimetic call in response to the stimulus. So is it right away where they're like, hey, this is here, alarm call, alarm call, alarm call. And I'm saying that that's what I think is going on, that they're giving these red-tailed hawks to be like, red-tailed hawk, red-tailed hawk, red-tailed hawk, watch out. It's something scary, but it's not the scariest, so they're using mimicry. And so why do they mimic red-tailed hawks the most? I have no idea. They are able to do northern goshawks. I don't know why they don't do northern goshawks. I think partly it's just exposure. Northern goshawks don't call as often as red-tailed hawks do, so they may just not have the opportunity to learn it here. Yes?
Are they using the red-tailed hawk mimic for something else that's threatening?
That's what I was just going to ask.
Yes. So according to my research, that they give it a little bit to other things, but it's mostly to red-tailed hawk. It could be just to a threat in general. I'm not 100% sure, actually. But it does seem to be in some sort of agitated state that they're giving this mimetic call. So I get it given to me a lot when I show up at the feeder. Yeah, but I also scare the crap out of them, so. Yes.
So can the red-tailed hawks know that this is an imitation?
Excellent question. I set out my first year to test that, and it's really hard to test.
Question?
Yes.
What's the question?
Oh, sorry. She wanted to know if red-tailed hawks can tell the difference between a real red-tailed hawk and a mimetic red-tailed hawk. And so, as I said, I set out to test this in northern goshawks. Turns out northern goshawks are just mad all the time and respond to any sound you play at them, especially in the breeding season. So I'm not 100% sure. We can tell the difference between red-tailed hawks, right? I mean, between the mimetic and the non-mimetic. However, I mean, maybe you can't. You can't. That's fine.
Apparently the jays can tell the difference. They know when it's one of their own.
Yeah, right, because they don't get as agitated when it's a mimetic call as if you play them an actual red-tailed hawk call. Absolutely. Yes?
Do you know of a case of a red-tailed hawk catching a Steller's jay?
There is some evidence that red-tailed hawks do actually eat Steller's jays. There was a stomach analysis that showed that Steller's jay was in there. How often it happens, I don't know. Red-tailed hawks are generalists. They'll kind of take whatever they can get. They eat a lot more mammals than they do birds, so I don't know how often it happens. Any other questions?
It's almost like it's just like a call to riot.
It could be,
Like
yeah.
they're just using it as a rallying cry almost.
It could be, and so if next time it happens, watch the feeder and see if it causes other birds to flee. In my experience, it does not, so I don't think that's what's going on. It's not being used in a sexual selection context.
Yeah.
And then this evidence here seems to support that it's some sort of alarm call. There's something about it that gets the other birds paying attention to what's going on around them. So it could be given to a human. They give it to my dog as well. Any other questions? Okay. Okay, so wrapping up, what my research has shown is that one, cue modality matters. It matters if they see or if they hear the predator. Hunting strategy matters. It matters if it's a maneuverable predator that's able to chase them versus a soaring predator. Size is not everything. Sharp-shinned hawks and northern goshawks are really different in size, and yet they're both deemed really threatening to Steller's jays. There seems to be an interaction between these three things, the cue, the hunting strategy, and the size going on to indicate what's threatening and what's non-threatening. Steller's jays make really subtle and precise distinctions between these different predators, and then they encode this information in their really acoustically simple alarm calls. Right, so they're just repeated element alarm calls, and yet they're able to change really slight things to encode for information about different predators. Okay, so that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 3 years. Okay, so this is what we were doing this year, is working on what we call communication networks. So this idea that species are able to listen to one another and use the alarm calls of others to detect threat level. So if you imagine all these different shapes and colors being different species, they're all interacting together. Some pay attention to others more. And so an example of this is that nuthatches will listen to black-capped chickadee alarm calls. So black-capped chickadees will alter their chickadee alarm calls, so they get the chickadee, dee, dee, dee. The more Ds they add, the more threatening the visual predator is. So if they're giving only 2 Ds to you, you're not that threatening. If they're giving 7 Ds to you, then they're deeming you as more threatening. So it's something you can actually listen for. And nuthatches are able to pick up on this difference in Ds. So if you play them a high threat chickadee call with lots of Ds, they get really agitated. They give their own little yank call, that yank, 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 yeah, that one. They give that, and then they also will do their little wing flick as well, which shows their agitation. So we know that the species can listen to one another. And so what we were setting out to test this year is a bigger scale of this. So we know that nuthatches listen to chickadees, but do chickadees listen to nuthatches? Do Steller's jays listen to chickadees? What about the squirrels or a downy or a hairy woodpecker? So how are all these species communicating and interacting with one another in this communication network about danger? And what happens when you change who is calling? So if a chickadee is calling, who's listening versus when a Steller's jay is calling? Maybe they don't all listen to each other symmetrically. Maybe it's asymmetrical. Or finally, if a nuthatch is calling. And so what we did is we had 2 sites. We had one up in Mazama, so at Ann Diamond's house. I don't know if any of you know her. So we mic'd up her entire woods. So what we did is we put out microphones and recorders throughout the entire area around her house. So we were able to record not only across space, but also across time, what's happening when we play these different species alarm calls to figure out who's listening, who's responding. So what we're able to do actually is, so with an example of these in the red, if these are 4 microphones transposed over there, if the red circle is a bird calling, we're actually able to triangulate in on the species that is calling and figure out their rough location. And this is because there is a delay in arrival time. So we're talking about the speed of sound, which is pretty fast, but there are differences. And so you can see this call highlighted in green, that they're not all starting at the exact same time. And so because of those differences, we're actually able to figure out what microphone they're closest to and triangulate in on their location. And so then what we can do is we can actually map the movement of information through the woods to figure out who's responding, when they're responding, and at what intensity they're responding. So that's what we spent the last month here doing, is we also had another site at Victor Glick's house. We did 2 arrays, 2 complete replicates at each array, and then we're going to be doing some in Montana as well. And so we just finished collecting all the data last week, so I don't have any of it to share with you because we haven't analyzed it yet. Sorry. But that's essentially what we've been doing. And this is all anecdotal, but it seems that red-breasted nuthatches are really important to this communication network. Steller shays listen to them, chickadees listen to them, nuthatches listen to them, squirrels listen to them. So just based on those 4 species, everyone is listening to nuthatches, which is pretty phenomenal if you think about it, because nuthatches kind of call to everything. And they call forever. Once they start, they yank on for 15, 20 minutes, right? And yet everyone's still paying attention to them. And so the chickadees seem less important than the red-breasted nuthatches, and no one really listens to the Steller shays except for Steller shays. That kind of seems how it's going. So,
How about the squirrels?
we didn't play a squirrel, but the squirrels pretty much respond to everything. Yeah, you play an alarm call and they get all riled up and they rattle and then they give their chip calls. And they also go on for like 15, 20 minutes. Yeah. So, hopefully, in the future, we will be able to actually take away these question marks and figure out who's communicating with who's paying attention to whom, and at what intensity over a large spatial scale. And so with that, before I move into the acoustic analysis tool, are there any questions so far?
There's lots, but my brain's
Okay. Yes, that was a lot of information about Steller shays and gray jays. We also covered gray jays. Okay, so I don't know how many of you actually were able to download the program Raven. It's a really neat program. There's a free version. It's from the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell, and it's the acoustic analysis tool that I use and my lab uses to analyze sound. And so what it does, it allows you to make a picture of a sound. So, if you have yours open, you should have a screen that looks like this, a nice purple screen, and all you have to do to open a sound is pick one. So we'll start with Steller's Jay, the creek call, drag it over, and it will open for you. And so what this does is this creates a picture of the sound. And so on the top here in the blue, you have the waveform, and that's just telling you amplitude over time. So how loud is it going to be at a given time point? And then down here, right here, this is the spectrogram. And so this, again, is frequency over here on the y-axis and time on the x-axis, okay? And so it's creating a picture that allows you to visualize what this sound looks like. And then we can... So that is that creek call. So if you follow the green line, you can actually see what it looks like when it's playing. And then we can actually slow it down if you want as well. So that's what it sounds at like halftime. So with a simple creek call that sounds like a rusty gate is actually a really complicated call, right? So it has what we call a harmonic stack. So it has this fundamental frequency here and then these stacks on top of it, a different sound, and then it goes into a lower frequency and then comes back up again over there, again with a harmonic stack. So that's an example of the creek call. So I also have some other calls. So this is the Steller J amp call. This is just a contact call that they give between each other. See if any of you guys have heard this. You guys ever heard that one?
Yeah.
Okay, that's a pretty common one too. So it kind of sounds, it looks a little bit like that wah call, right? It's really broadband and kind of a stack. But if you look closely, it's actually really, really different. And that's what makes it sound different, is that there are these, what we call frequency modulated steps here. So these lines right here are what's causing it to sound different than the wah call. Even though the general structure is just this smear of sound, it has these little pieces to it that make it sound different. And there's the crow. So I also have another gray jay call. So this is the gray jay chatter call, so this is their alarm call. Have you guys ever heard that one?
Yeah.
Yep. So that's the gray jay chatter call. And so if you look at it closely, it's a lot darker. So we can zoom into it. And so it looks really different now, right, when you zoom into it. And so it's these, again, these frequency modulated stacks and then a smear of sound afterwards. And that's what's giving it why it sounds the way that it does, is because of this acoustic structure, as we call it. So we can listen to another one. Oops. So this is a black-billed magpie. I call them alien sounds. I don't really know what else to call them. I'm kind of alien-like, right? So that's what those look like there. And again, it's a lot darker. Okay, and so there's a lot of different pieces to this sound, and so what this program allows you to do is actually start to dissect sound apart to make it understand, or to help you understand why it sounds the way that it does. So the other really cool thing that you can do with this is you can actually record your own voice, which is really fun. Hello, my name is Alexis. So this is what human voice looks like. So these right here are T's and S's. That's that. Name is Alexis. So you can see the S's and the T's, and then everything else is this frequency modulated kind of smear, and we actually have really low frequency voices in comparison to a lot of other birds. And so you can tell that by comparing it to other spectrograms. So you can look at human voice versus magpie voice and actually compare the two and start to look at them. The other really fun thing you can do is you can actually mimic some of these bird calls into here and then compare how good you are. I'm terrible at it, so I'm not going to do it in front of you because I'm just going to embarrass myself. But if any of you are really good bird mimics, you can actually record yourself and we can compare it to what it actually looks like by downloading the sound from the Lab of Ornithology. So that's just a little brief intro into the program. If any of you guys want help loading in the sounds and taking a look at them, I'd be happy to help you because we still have some time. So, yes?
Is there a library of other samples that you have access to?
Yes, so the Lab of Ornithology at Cornell has the Macaulay Library. It's the largest sound archive in the world. And so you can listen to sounds there and you can order sounds off of them, actually. If there are certain sounds that you want, they have recordings of things I didn't even know made sound, in all honesty.
Can you get the Macaulay Library stuff without paying for the subscription?
You can listen to them for free. I believe to order them, you may have to pay. Yes. But if you want, I have a bunch of sample sounds I can just give you also. including like bearded seal and cow and chicken laying an egg and other such things. Honestly, this is like this. You can spend hours playing
If you have
with
like
Raven.
one of these CDs of songs and you download it on your computer, can you drag?
You would have to change them from MP3s.
Okay.
If you change them from MP3s into WAV files, then yes, you can. Any other questions? Okay. Well, with that, if anyone wants help with Raven, I'd be happy to help you or to answer any questions. Yes.
This is a very funny question, but we keep talking about the corvids as being songbirds,
Yes.
and I'm having a little trouble, but what is classification of songbird?
The classification of songbird is an order of birds. So we have class and then order, the passer forms. They're also called the perching birds. So they don't necessarily have to have a song. It actually has to do with the location of their toes on their feet that all put them into the same order. And so they're all in the same order because they're most closely related to one another. So corvids are more closely related to swallows than they are to geese. Yes?
Are Steller's jays afraid of ravens?
Excellent question. So I have anecdotal evidence about ravens being predatory. So our Steller jay is afraid of ravens. I think most birds are afraid of ravens, in all honesty, for a couple of reasons. One, when they're flying over, it's really hard to tell that they're not a hawk or an eagle because they're huge. And then two, they're pervasive nest predators in the breeding season. So come breeding season, pretty much everything is afraid of ravens. Yes.
This is a story to tell you. We have had for years an interaction between Sharpies and Steller's jays every September. The immature Sharpies come and sit with them. This is when we're feeding in September. Usually we don't, but they sit on our lawn furniture, sit on them, and the jays would totally ignore them.
Really?
The Sharpies would dive at him, and the jays would just jump, to one side. And we started calling it the game because it would happen every day.
Huh.
And this would go on for a week or so. It still goes on. And as the season progressed, they got a little more leery because this Sharpie was a little more adept at it. But the jays seemed to know that the Sharpie wasn't going to get them. They'd sit right next to each other.
Interesting.
One little chair, the jay down here.
Mhm.
Then they start chasing each other. First the Sharpie chase them, and then we go around the trees.
Yeah.
Then we also had flickers get in the whole scene, and they would start doing the same thing.
Cross-species communication.
So,
That's
if
interesting.
you're interested, we quit feeding, we used to put corn out, and
Mhm.
that would attract the jays, and that attracted the Sharpies, and that would happen every September.
Interesting. Because my research shows that they're terrified of sharp-shinned hawks. So, yeah, that's really interesting.
But immature Sharpies.
Immature Sharpies. Oh, okay. Okay, so it could just be that they're not that great at hunting yet, that they're not really a threat yet. Okay.
But how would they know?
How would they know?
But how would they know?
Experience. I guess if a Sharpie tries to get them and they can see that they're not that great at flying or something like that. Interesting. It seemed to work though, right? Yeah.
So when you were talking about what they eat, do they? It didn't look like they were carrion feeders the way that ravens and magpies can be. So is there some reason, like certain birds in the because the gray jays don't really do it either, I guess. I mean, do Clark and so someone asked if Clarks typically eat meat, and I said no, I don't think so, and they said they have it in their yard right now, a Clark's nutcracker eating, it's a dead animal.
Yeah. Well, I mean, so they're not carrion eaters like magpies or crows or ravens, which that's a substantial portion of their diet. But I think they still will eat carrion if it's available to them. I don't think they're very picky.
But a Steller jay isn't going to go like hunt down a mouse.
No.
Yeah.
No,
It's
definitely
gonna
not.
eat it.
No, the only hunting they do, although there is evidence in the Birds of North America that there's Steller jays have taken a pygmy nuthatch before And then they also always take the nestlings and stuff like that too.
Yeah.
So that's kind of the most hunting that they do,
Yeah.
is taking nestlings and eggs, and probably fledglings if they can get them. Yes.
So what are you studying next?
Excellent question. So I'm not 100% sure. I'll finish my PhD in December, and then from there I might switch to frogs for a little bit,
Wow.
try something new down in Panama, or I may continue with the J stuff. So it'll depend where the funding comes from, in all honesty.
Will the frogs be acoustic?
Yes, it will. It'll be multimodal communication. So looking at their visual, tactile, and acoustic communication, and how the combinations essentially mean different things. Yes.
How do the predators respond to the jay calls?
Excellent question. I'm not 100% sure.
How do predators respond to the J calls?
Sorry, I should be better at doing that. I'm not 100% sure. The only playbacks I've done to predators have been to nesting goshawks. And as I said, if you play anything to a nesting goshawk, they get real mad. So I'm not 100% sure. From the few observations that I've had of real mobbing events, and what the research shows is that mobbing is actually really useful, and it causes the predator to leave the area farther than they would if they were not mobbed. Because it often comes with physical assault as well, so you'll see them come and biff them on the back of the head, along with the calls. Anything else?
If you have too many alarm calls,
Mm-hmm.
you talked about setting off the squirrel that went out for 20 minutes. So sometimes you have a cacophony, all sorts of alarm calls that keep going and going and going.
Mm-hmm.
Wouldn't that tend to desensitize all the birds around?
Oh, as far as like the squirrels
Well,
going on for
if
too
you
long.
hear this going on and on and on and on, oh, it's
Mhm.
those squirrels again, or oh, it's those jays again.
Yeah, and so that's why I think that they're not responding to every alarm call the same. And this is again just anecdotal from just being out there, is that for whatever reason the nuthatches are deemed reliable. I don't know why, because they seem to go on, but so the Steller jays are listening to the nuthatches, but they're not listening to the chickadees. And yet nuthatches and chickadees are roughly the same size, so why the nuthatch over the chickadee? And I think it has to do with reliability, is that nuthatches are just more reliable. Their information is more reliable than chickadees are. Yes.
So last week you heard me ask the question about Clark's nutcrackers and Steller's jays in
Mhm.
my neighborhood seem to be doing this sort of interspecies communication, and I wonder about, well, what are they saying to each other? Like, do you have any sense? I mean, are they talking about a predator, or are they talking about food? Are they saying, I'm over at this tree, you stay over there, don't come over here? I mean, do you have any idea, like, what they're saying to each other?
Based on my experience with Clark's nutcrackers and Steller jays at the same feeder, it's probably don't touch that.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, probably has to do with food and stay away, and they're constantly fighting over a resource.
Yeah.
It seems to be.
Yeah, that's as a group, like there's a small group of Stellers and a
Mhm.
small group of Clarks. They're kind of like the Crips and the Bloods.
Absolutely, yeah, it's like a gang war out there. It's tough being in Corbett. Any other questions?
How territorial are the jays?
Excellent question. So actually they're not very territorial. It's actually really difficult to flush a jay from their nest. So the closer you get to their nest, the more territorial they're going to be. But they don't have territories like a lot of other songbirds do, where they're going to kind of defend it in an area like that. So you'll see them a little bit. So if you see them fighting at a feeder, it's usually probably because, one, there's some sort of hierarchy. So some birds are more juvenile or are not as high in the hierarchy, and those are the ones that are going to be displaced. But they don't hold year-round territories here.
Back to your comments earlier about intelligence,
Yes.
do you include the ability to successfully stash and find what you've stashed, an index of intelligence?
I think so. I mean, I can't do that. I do stuff all the time.
Well, I would think so. It wasn't on your list, so I wondered if it was.
No, yeah, that's an excellent point. I did put that on my list. I should. Yeah, the spatial memory is truly impressive in Steller jays, and then I think there's going to be someone talking about Clark's nutcrackers and about their spatial memory, which is just off the charts.
And the gray jays.
And the gray jays as well, with their cool sticky saliva. Yes.
You have, I have half a dozen, maybe more, jays at my feeder. Are they likely to be a family group?
So the question was that she has a bunch of Steller jays. Are they likely to be a family group? And that is an excellent question, and we're not 100% sure. So another difference between the subspecies is that some hold year-round territories and some form groups in the wintertime. So here, they're altitudinal migrants, so they come down in elevation, right? So that's why you don't really see them around in the summer, is because they're just up higher. And so it's thought that they are family groups, that it is a pair and maybe they're young for the year, or a couple pairs. And so I think it could be both. But because resources are not as plentiful in the wintertime, it may be that their territories that they hold up in the higher elevations just disappear in the wintertime and they form kind of collective groups. So, but no one's done genetics or anything like that to figure out if it is actually related, if they're related or not. Yes?
What do they do at night? Like, do they roost together, or?
We're not 100% sure of that either. As far as I know, they do not roost like crows do, like to a big flock into a big tree like that. I think they stay with their group or their pair. Oh, and they sleep with their head turned back around, tucked into their wing, which sounds adorable. Any other questions?